Hello friends. This is Phoenix What If. How are you all? So in this video, we will see. What if Naruto awakened with the power of Death God and fell in love with Rukia'Kuchik? But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also if possible share this video. Naruto. Sasuke. The two boys yelled as they raced toward each other, both using all the strength they had. Naruto was using 3 tails and holding a crimson Rasen shuriken, though even as he raced towards Sasuke he was mentally preparing to rip the seal off that cage in his mind. Sasuke was in the second stage of his cursed seal using his full body Chidori. He was prepared to kill. This would end it. As the two attacks met, Sasuke forced all of his chakra into the attack while Naruto ripped off the seal. The explosion was incredible. Rocks and dirt flew everywhere, completely destroying the clearing they had chosen as their battleground. Both 18-year-old boys were thrown into the ground. Sasuke's chakra was dying out as he returned to his original form. Naruto on the other hand looked horrible. His chest was ripped to pieces and all Fox's chakra that had been released during the fight seemed to be spinning and being sucked into the broken seal on his stomach. He didn't notice any of this. He could feel his life slipping away. He could also hear someone screaming. He noticed it was him who was screaming. Another thing he noticed was that he was screaming from 2 different places, one from the battered and beaten up body on the ground, and the other from what he figured was his soul. It seemed that the red chakra that was being absorbed by Naruto's body was moving past that and through the chain connecting the 2 entities. He then felt light as a feather and noticed that the chakra had stopped flowing into him. His body wasn't breathing. He looked at his chest and saw that the chain connecting him and his body had broken. Naruto Uzumaki was dead. Sasuke Uchiha was not. Sasuke slowly stood up and walked over to Naruto's dead body and landed on his knees next to him. He didn't know why, but he felt incredibly sad. He had finally finished off Naruto. They had become enemies as they grew older, and Sasuke had thought if he had ended Naruto's life, he would have felt better, but he didn't. Naruto sighed. He didn't know what to do. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Hello, kid." Naruto was surprised. "Fox," he yelled, "I thought you were gone. At first I was out, but that damn seal sucked me back into your body, trying to use my chakra to keep you alive," the Kyuubi replied. "So how are you here?" Naruto asked. "It seems that your spirit body absorbed me through that chain," he said. "So now I am stuck with you in my spirit body? Forever?" Naruto asked. "Seems that way," the large fox said in a bored tone. "I may not like it. I hope to be free, but I see no point in dwelling on something that might have happened." Naruto sighed. "Fine," he said, "but you better be helpful while we are together." "How is this for helpful?" the Kyuubi said. "Look at those strange things coming toward you." Naruto looked around and saw 3 very large creatures. These creatures were all black and each had a white mask covering their face. Each also had a hole in their chest. The first looked like a giant rat but with an ape-like mask on its face. The second seemed more complex. It had 4 limbs that stood out from its body. Each foot had 3 incredibly sharp nails. This creature also had a large scorpion-like tail. Its mask was elongated with a point for a chin and the top of its head. The eye holes in the mask were slitted like a snake's eyes. The third was a large spider-type creature. It had more legs than it was supposed to. It had 8 legs holding its small round body up, while 4 more stuck out like giant scythes. The mask had large eye holes and 2 sharp teeth jutting upwards. Naruto was amazed. These creatures were huge and made him feel like a house cat in front of humans. The second one looked down at him and stared at Naruto for a while. The spider-looking one was the first to speak. "This little bug is the source of that incredible Ryatsu?" it asked in a mocking tone. "That is impossible?" The first one seemed to agree. The second one, however, just kept looking at Naruto. "No matter if he is or not, he will provide excellent energy." "You can have him," Spider said and motioned for the first one to follow him. "We will look for more." Naruto was slightly ticked off. These creatures were talking about him as some sort of side dish. Even more though, he did not like the vibes he was getting from them. After he finished with this guy he was going to have to go after the other 2. He looked up at the creature in front of him. "Mind if I get your name?" he asked. The creature seemed to chuckle. "Brave one you were," he said. "If you must know, my name is Slicer, and before you ask, Yes, I am going to eat you. Naruto nodded and held his palm out to gather the chakra needed to preform a Rasengan. He looked over at his hand when he didn't feel anything. What? I don't have chakra. He could feel some strange energy but had no clue what it was. He felt something moving toward him and jumped back as one of Slicer's clawed feet hit the spot where Naruto had just been. At least my speed hasn't changed, he thought, relieved. This one is quick. The large hollow thought, swinging another clawed foot at Naruto, only to have it dodged again. Naruto smiled. This was easy, but he still needed a plan to beat the large creature. 2 clawed feet came from both sides of him. He went to jump but noticed the scorpion-like tail coming toward him. Having no way to dodge, Naruto shut his eyes and waited for his death. Suddenly there was the sound of blades slicing and Naruto dared to open an eye. Then he felt it, some sort of power was pressing on him. He looked up and saw 2 things at once. 1. Slicer was missing 2 limbs and a tail. 2. There was a beautiful woman standing in front of him holding what looked like a katana. Naruto watched as the woman bounded forward and cut right through the mask of the large hollow, making it disappear. He was amazed as she walked over and looked at him. Are you all right? She asked. He nodded, stepping in front of her. What is your name? She asked. Naruto Uzumaki, he replied, looking into her eyes. What was that thing and what are you? He asked. That was a hollow, a tainted soul, she replied with no emotion, and I am a Shinigami. A Shinigami performs soul burials and purifies hollows. Naruto thought she was being straightforward, then moved back when she raised her blade toward his head. What are you doing? He asked the woman. Soul burial, she said. I am going to send you to Soul Society. She tapped his forehead with the base of her hilt. Wait, I didn't get your name, Naruto said. The woman smiled. Soi Fong, she said, and Naruto disappeared on his way to Soul Society. Wow, Naruto said, taking in his surroundings. He had appeared in what looked like a rundown city. It was sort of good and sort of grimy. The people he had talked to said that he was in District 79 out of 80. He also learned that the higher the number, the worse the place looked. He could guess that if he headed to the lower numbered districts, it would get cleaner and well taken care of. He looked around and everyone seemed to be working hard to make the place somewhat better than it was. He walked over to a man who was sweeping. Excuse me, sir, he asked, but what is going on? The man chuckled. You must be new, he said, earning a nod from Naruto. Well, the Shinigami are coming to look for new recruits. Naruto nodded, smiling. I wonder if I can join? He asked aloud. Well, you can ask them, but they can be picky if you are not strong enough, the man said, pointing down the alleyway. Naruto looked, followed the man's pointing, and saw 3 people. 2 of them looked like kids. A girl with raven hair and a strand parted straight down the middle of her face. The other kid was a boy. He had red hair that was tied in a ponytail and a smart-ass look on his face. Naruto smiled as he recognized the person leading them. Soi Fong, he yelled, waving his hand. The woman in question looked at him. Her first thought was, who is he? Then she remembered, this boy with spiked blonde hair, whisker marks on his cheeks and sky-blue eyes. Naruto, she said, walking up to him with the 2 kids following her. I see you have been fine since I last saw you. She didn't smile. It was rare that she ever did. Naruto nodded. So I hear that the Shinigami are looking for recruits? He asked, earning a nod from Soi Fong. That is right, Naruto, she said calmly. Are you interested? Naruto nodded. That would be great, he said. Are these 2 also joining the Shinigami? Soi Fong nodded. Yes. She gestured to the girl. This is Rukia, she said as said girl bowed to Naruto. Nice to meet you, the small girl said politely. If this boy was friends with one of the captains, then it would be good to get on his good side. Naruto nodded as Soi Fong moved to the boy. And this is Renji Aburai, she introduced. Renji was not as polite as Rukia. Why is he so special as to know you, Captain Soi Fong? He asked hotly. Naruto got a little angry. What was that, you little brat? He asked as Renji got in his face. You don't look so special. I bet I could whip you with one hand behind my back. Naruto was full on angry now. I wouldn't need my hands, he replied. I could knock you out with just my feet. Renji's eyebrow twitched. He couldn't take it anymore. Take this, he yelled, throwing a punch at Naruto. He was met by thin air, and the next thing he knew was that he was flying away from the others and landing face first in the dirt. Naruto was standing behind where Renji had been, his legs standing outstretched. He was smirking. "See, I told you I didn't need my hands," he said, lowering his foot to the side. Soi Fong was impressed by his speed. It was fast for a normal soul, but then again, Naruto was no normal soul. She could feel that Naruto had a high-level spirit pressure. Rukia was blinking and wiping her eyes. She had seen Renji throw a punch at Naruto, and suddenly Naruto had been behind him with Renji flying away. Naruto sighed. "So about me entering?" he asked, looking at Soi Fong. "How does that work anyway?" The captain of the second division nodded. "Well, you are required to join the academy to learn Kido, Ho-Ho, and learn how to gain your Zanpakuto." Naruto understood. In his years of growing up, he had learned to shut his mouth and listen to what his instructors had to say. He learned quite a lot, but he didn't understand one thing. "What is a Zanpakuto?" he asked. Soi Fong unsheathed her katana and showed it to Naruto. "This is a Zanpakuto. It is a physical manifestation of a Shinigami's soul," she explained. "Then let's get going," Naruto said as Soi Fong nodded. "Hey hothead, let's go!" Naruto yelled to Renji as they walked off. Renji followed, muttering curses under his breath about speed. Later at the Shinigami Academy, Naruto was amazed. The place was huge. The roof of the middle of the building is shaped like a pagoda, while the rest went left and right outward from the center of the building and branched toward what looked like an entryway. The entire building was surrounded by a wall. Once through the entryway, Naruto saw that the building was 3 stories high with several windows. Once inside the building, he realized the large pagoda-like part of the building held an enormous auditorium. They were told to sit down and wait as the auditorium filled up with students. Soi Fong nodded to them. "Enjoy the next 6 years in the academy," she said, and shun-PO'd away. Naruto blinked. She is fast, he thought. He was brought out of his thoughts as an old man with one long beard walked up onto the stage. "First off, I would like to say welcome to the Shinigami Academy to the new recruits," he said in a loud, strong voice. "And good luck to the ones who are moving into their new year." He waved his hand and students left, but others stayed. Naruto guessed that the ones left were new students. "My name is Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni," he said, "and I am the captain of the first division and the commander of all Shinigami." "Now," the old man said, "you new students will be here for the next 6 years. He tapped his staff on the stage and what appeared to be the teachers. "These teachers will teach you everything you need to know about being Shinigami." The old man gave a smile. "As you know, you will be trained in Kido, Ho-Ho, and Zanjutsu." He looked around. "You will now move into the rooms behind me to gain your Zanpakuto." He moved away as the large curtain moved to the sides behind him, showing 3 doors. "Now would 3 people come to me?" he asked. Naruto looked around and saw that most of the people looked either afraid or scared. Now Naruto was not one to beat around the bush, and he looked at Rukia and Renji. "I don't know about you two, but I am going," he said, jumping up and walking up to Yamamoto. "I'll go first, old man," Naruto said, smiling. Said old man smiled at Naruto's boldness. "Very we." He was interrupted as Renji came up holding Rukia by the wrist. "We will go too," he said, not wanting to be shown up by Naruto. Yamamoto smiled a little more and the 3 doors opened. Naruto, Renji, and Rukia walked through their own door. The doors shut behind them. Those 3 will be good friends in the future, he thought. It was dark. That was the first thing Naruto noticed. A red glow suddenly covered him and his surroundings. "Hey, I know this place," he said, smiling as he heard the familiar drip of water. He was in his mind. He followed the path he knew well and ended up in the large room that held the large cage doors. The gates were open. That was no surprise to Naruto. He could feel the strange energy he had felt when he met the hollow slicer. "Hey fox!" he yelled and heard an audible growl coming from a door to his right. It glowed with a dark red light. "Huh? That wasn't there before," he said, walking up to it. On the surface the words yin were written on it. Under that word was the word hollow. Naruto backed up. He didn't want to deal with another hollow at the moment. He heard something. A soft feminine giggle come from behind him. He turned around and saw another door. This door glowed with a white comforting light. He saw that this door too had writing. "Yang," he read, and under that, "Zanpakuto," he reached for the doorknob and yanked it open. The 18-year-old boy was yanked into a large field and saw the door disappear behind him. He landed on the grass and looked around. He saw a countless number of red rose petals floating through the air high above him and sniffed. The air was filled with the scent of roses. "This is a nice place, hum?" a female voice asked from behind him. He turned around and was greeted by a beautiful sight. A woman was standing there. She had flame red hair and matching slitted red eyes. She was wearing a light pink kimono that had pictures of roses on them. You could easily tell she had a perfect figure and her skin was flawless. "Don't stare at me, Naruto," she said, giggling. "You are embarrassing me." Naruto snapped out of his daze. "Sorry," he said, rubbing the back of his head. "Wait, how do you know my name?" She giggled again. "I have been with you since you were born," she said. "Really?" he asked. "Mind if I know your name?" "Sure," she said happily. "It is Shiryo Kitsune." "Nice name," Naruto said, smiling. This, however, seemed to make her extremely happy and she hugged him. "You could hear my name?" she asked, completely overjoyed. "Sure. Why wouldn't I?" he asked, confused. "Well, some Shinigami can't hear their Zanpakuto's name the first few times," she said, hugging him tighter. "Oh," he said. "I get it. So you are my Zanpakuto?" "Yes," she said. "And if you ever need to use my power, just shout out my name and swing me in a downward motion, okay?" Naruto nodded. "And if you ever want to talk, just think about this place before you go to sleep," she said. "It is time for you to go now." "I guess it is," he said, looking at the door that had appeared. He smiled and hugged Shiryo. "See you later," he said, opening the door and walking out. As the door closed, he felt a strange weight on his left side and looked up to see Yamamoto, Rukia, and Renji looking at him. "Let us see your Zanpakuto," the old man said, stepping up. Naruto nodded and put his hand on the dark red hilt of his blade and drew it from his sheath. It looked like a normal katana in size and shape, but the color was strange. Starting from the red hilt, the blade was black with a bright red streak that spiraled up both sides of the blade. Looking at his Zanpakuto, Naruto could not help but smile. He felt comfortable with the sword in his hand. He could feel the spirit of the blade. "Well, you three should find your dorms and get some rest for tomorrow," Yamamoto said as Naruto sheathed his blade. The three nodded and waved their goodbyes to the old Shinigami before walking off. Naruto was the first to see it as they walked past doors with names on it. "No way," he said, running up to a door. "What is it, Naruto?" Rukia asked, trying to look over the taller boy's shoulders. He moved out of the way. "We all have the same dorm," he said, smiling. Rukia smiled and opened the door. "I call first shower, and I will hit anyone who peeks," she said, seeing Renji's look turn perverted, and ran off into the bathroom. Naruto shook his head. "Not much to peek at," he thought, smiling. "She is as flat as a board." He laid on the bed to relax. Tomorrow was the beginning of his new life, 3 years later. Sweat rolled down his back as he pushed himself further in his training. The sword gracefully cut through the air with almost no resistance. He was training because he had gotten challenged. And all because he had reverted back to his original hot-headed ways. Flashback: Naruto was walking down the hallway. It was after all of his classes were done for the day. He walked around a corner and someone ran into him. "Hey, watch where you are going," a large muscle-bound man said, lifting Naruto up. Naruto slapped the man's hand away. "Why don't you watch where you are going?" he said. "You bumped into me." The large man gave him a shove. "You don't want me as an enemy. I am incredibly strong and I also come from one prestigious family." Naruto snorted. "Great, a spoiled brat who thinks he is the best," he said, watching as the man gripped the hilt of his blade. "I am Jonathan Presley," he said, "and I challenge you to a duel at the arena." He smirked. "Though it won't be a very long duel, you'll be wiped out by Zenzume Supaiku and I." He pushed Naruto out of the way and walked off. End of flashback. Naruto sighed and sat down, breathing deeply. "Man, I hope I can activate my Shikai," he said. The last time he had tried, it hadn't worked. Even though he knew her name, he hadn't had the control to cause it to release. Whenever he tried, a ton of his spirit energy would be expelled with no result. It was like he was a kid all over again. He sheathed Shiryo and stood up. He needed mental training as well as physical. He began to walk back to the dorm. The whiskered boy opened the door and walked in and laid on the bed. He was soon asleep. Inside Naruto's head, Naruto opened his eyes and found himself laying on grass. He sat up and saw her. She was sitting on the grass holding her own blade. "Are you ready to train?" she asked, looking at Naruto. Naruto nodded, standing up and unsheathing his Zanpakuto. "I am always ready to improve myself." She laughed and stood up. "I like your attitude," she said, smiling. Then she lunged at him. He was surprised at first but managed to block her attack. He then retaliated with his own thrusts and attacks. They parried and struck at each other with no avail. Naruto was amazed at her skill. She seemed a lot better than him and made his attacks seem almost childish. He had the feeling she was going easy on him. She leapt back and ran toward him, raising her blade in an upward arc. Naruto was able to lean back so his head wasn't cut through, but he felt a small nick on his nose. He soon realized that she had released the hilt and allowed her sword to fly up into the air. He looked back to her and was struck with incredibly fast punches and kicks. It actually looked like thousands of fists and feet were hitting him repeatedly. He flew back and hit the ground hard. He flinched when his katana stuck into the ground next to his head. Naruto looked back at her and saw her catch her blade with ease. "That was amazing," he said, getting up slowly. She smiled. "Thanks. I do best with my hands and feet anyway," she said, walking up to him. "Now you should get some rest so you are ready for that fight." He nodded. "I wouldn't worry," he said. "That guy was big, but I bet he was just showing off." He saw that she was shaking her head. Some of the nobles actually do train hard. Naruto thought this over. "Yeah. When I was alive I saw tons of nobles who tried hard to be their best." Shiryu nodded. "Now go to sleep. You need all your strength in case he does appear to be a strong opponent." Naruto sighed. "Fine," he said, laying down and getting comfortable. "Good night, Shiryu Kitsune," he said, shutting his eyes and losing himself to slumber. Shiryu smiled softly. "Good night, Naruto," she said, walking off. She came up to a door and walked through it to appear in the large seal room. "Come on, I know you are there," she said. A large growl came from behind the door marked Yin, and it opened to reveal a large slitted fox eye. "So you are the Kit's Zanpakuto?" the nine-tailed fox said, looking at her closely. "What kind are you, Kido related? Or melee related?" She grinned. "I am melee based," she said. "And are you supposed to be his hollow?" The great demon laughed. "I guess so. If had died when he did I would have went to hell." He chuckled. "I am not sure which would have been worse, being stuck in hell or this body." He sighed as he calmed down. "At least here the Kit will be able to use my power once again, and I will have a body to use for a little while." "I will do my best to stop you," she said. "It won't matter, as he grows stronger, our realms grow closer. We will be one again." The eye showed that the fox was smiling. "This room is a little cramped. I cannot wait to have all of that field of yours to move around." "Naruto will beat you when the day comes," she said. "He will have both of our powers to control. You best train him well. If he is not ready, I will take over this mind." Shiryu slammed the door and walked back into her own. She sat down and watched Naruto sleep. "Please don't let him take over, Naruto," she said. In the morning, "Naruto!" a female's voice yelled into his ear, causing Naruto to yell and sit up, his eyes wide open and him looking around wildly. His sights soon found an angry-looking Rukia standing next to his bed. "Finally," she said angrily, "I have been trying to wake you up for the past 15 minutes. She tossed him his school uniform. "Now get dressed and come meet Renji and I for breakfast." She stormed out, stopping only to warn Naruto not to go back to sleep. Naruto sighed and hopped out of bed. "That is one hot-tempered girl," he mumbled as he slipped on his uniform. He wasn't surprised though, he had been around her since they started at the academy. Though he was used to her quick anger, he was still scared of it. It reminded him all too much of a pink-haired teammate of his. He shook his head as he finished getting dressed and headed out toward their usual eating spot. He spotted Renji talking with his mouth full of food as usual and Rukia doing her usual thing of hitting him upside the head. Naruto chuckled. In those 3 years, the three of them had become good friends, with Naruto and Renji being rivals for everything, and Rukia hitting both of them if they took it too far. Renji had gotten taller than him and Rukia. He even started getting tattoos in the places where his eyebrows used to be. Naruto had once seen that he also had tattoos on his chest as well. He had wondered, where in the hell is he getting those tattoos from? Renji also had longer hair. Naruto guessed that when let out of the ponytail, it would fall down his back. Rukia hadn't changed much. She was a little taller and showed signs that her hair was longer, but there wasn't much of a change from when they had met. Naruto smiled and thought something he had thought before: she is probably going to be flat-chested for the rest of her afterlife. He sat down near them, glad that Rukia had remembered to get him some breakfast. "So guys, what is new today?" he asked. Renji looked at him. The entire academy is talking about your fight with Presley," he said. "And just so you know, if you lose I will come and whoop your ass, because you losing makes me look bad." Naruto grinned. "I am not going to lose, I am going to knock that guy into next week." He pumped his fist into the air. Rukia smiled at her blonde friend's enthusiasm. "So have you gotten your Shikai yet?" she asked, seeing Naruto's face droop and thinking that she should have kept her mouth shut. "No," he said. "I have been trying as hard as I can, but I can't release it." He seemed downtrodden. "Ah, you won't even need it to beat that guy," Renji said, smiling. He hated to see his rival get upset over something like that. "Like you said, you are going to knock him into next week." This seemed to make Naruto happier. "Yeah, maybe even into next month," he said, laughing. His two best friends smiled, glad that he was happy again. Then again, it was easy to make Naruto happy. They looked at the clock. Today was a special day. Classes were cancelled so students could test their strengths against one another. Naruto nodded. "Time to go," he said as his two friends nodded. The three of them got up and headed for the arena. Once at the arena, Naruto was confronted by Jonathan. "Hey Uzumaki," he said. Apparently he had learned Naruto's name from someone else. Naruto looked at him. "Presley," he said. Said boy looked smug. "I am surprised you showed up. I figured a weakling like you would have thought better than going up against me." He laughed. "But I guess you aren't that smart." He was looking for a reaction from Naruto. When he didn't get it, his smug attitude turned to anger. "Well, it doesn't matter. I am going to wipe the floor with you." He walked off toward the center of the arena. Naruto grinned and followed him, waving to Rukia and Renji as they headed up into the stands. Once at the center, the large Shinigami in training turned to face Naruto. "Last chance to back down," he said. Naruto shook his head. "You just don't want to fight me," he said, smiling as he unsheathed his weapon and watched as the other boy followed suit. "I am going to knock that smile off your face," his opponent said, lunging at him with surprising speed. Naruto dodged the jab and moved away. "For a big guy he is pretty fast," he said, dodging another blow. He began to retaliate with his own jabs and swipes, though all of them were either blocked or dodged. "Wait," he thought. "This is like the training from last night." He blocked another blow and shoved his large opponent back. He jumped back and rushed forward, then with the upward slash, that was easily dodged, he let his blade fly into the air. With this distraction, Naruto focused his spirit energy into his fists and feet. Then he moved and began to punch and kick his opponent with incredible speed. With one last punch he sent Jonathan flying back and raised his hand to catch his blade in his hand. "How was that, Presley?" he said, grinning. Said person slowly stood up, grinning. "That was a pretty sweet attack, Uzumaki," he said. "But playtime is over." He held his blade outward. "Pierce my opponent. Zentsume Supaiku." Naruto felt an incredible pressure on his body and realized with shock that his opponent had just released his Zanpakuto. Spikes. That was what Naruto saw first. Spikes covered Jonathan from head to toe. Two large spikes stood out from his palms, while the spikes on his body were smaller compared to the ones on his palms. They still showed that they could defend against most attacks. Then he vanished. "That is a fast shunpo," Naruto said, looking around before being backhanded across the area. He landed sliding on his feet and turned to see several spikes flying at him with great speed. He was able to dodge some of them. The ones that had hit him only grazed him, giving small cuts. Naruto tried to move but was bombarded by more spikes. These drove into his sides and caused Naruto great pain. He fell to the ground and saw a shadow loom over him. "Time to die, Uzumaki," he heard before he saw a giant spike aiming for his head. He thought he heard someone scream his name as he swung his blade down in a last-ditch attempt. "Rise. Shurio Kitsune," he yelled, then he felt the power. Up in the stands, Renji and Rukia were watching as Naruto tossed his Zanpakuto into the air and beat on Jonathan. Then it went bad. Jonathan released his Zanpakuto and began to beat Naruto around like a rag doll. Then Naruto had fallen and Rukia watched as Jonathan raised his right hand to stab Naruto in the head. "Naruto!" She had screamed and watched as Naruto swung his sword and yelled its name, That was when she and Renji had felt it. They both gasped at what they saw. Naruto's legs and arms were covered in black armor that had a red tint to it. The armor on his legs looked like boot that came from his knees to cover his feet. The armor on his arms looked like gloves that went down from his shoulders to his fingers and formed what looked like claws. Rukia wondered how gloves and boots could help. Then she saw the large spike's tip was stopped at Naruto's arm. Naruto looked up. His wounds were healed as he pushed his opponent back and raised his foot high. My turn. He slammed his foot into the ground, causing it to spit and crumble toward Jonathan and threw him off balance. Naruto bent low and moved his arms into a parallel position with his palms facing outwards and his clawed fingers turned inwards. Let's see if this works again. He rushed forward and slammed his fist into Jonathan, then began to speed up. Naruto barrage, he yelled as his fists and feet beat his opponent with incredible speed and power. With one last punch he sent Jonathan slamming into the arena's wall to stay stuck there. Naruto didn't move until his opponent fell unconscious, then he stood up. It was quiet for a few minutes, then everyone broke into a loud cheer. Naruto smiled and waved, then he tilted backwards and felt two pairs of hands catch him. Geez, Naruto, isn't that armor heavy? He heard Renji ask, to which he mumbled a no but felt the armor disappear and turn back into its katana form. Much better, Renji said, carrying Naruto. Rukia get his Zanpakuto. That was the last thing Naruto heard before he fell unconscious. He woke up on a bed in the infirmary and saw Rukia sitting there. Hey, he said, smiling. She smiled back. Hey. I won, right? He asked and received a nod. Sweet, he said, happily punching the air above him, and I achieved my Shikai. He smiled. Rukia smiled back. That is good, she said. Now you need to get some rest and heal whatever wounds you still have. She leaned over and ate his forehead, making him blush before she left. Well, Naruto said, laying back and closing his eyes, this has been a great day. 13 captains were sitting in their assigned seats. They were deciding who would be in their divisions. Rukia was being sent to the 13th division because of her outstanding ability to use both Kido and Zanjutsu. The captain of the division was Ukitake Jashiro. Even though he was strong, he was held back by his tuberculosis. Renji was being sent to the 5th division, but depending on how he did, he may be moved. He could also fit in the 11th and 6th divisions. Next on the list was Naruto Uzumaki. He should be put in the 11th division, one Kenpachi Zaraki said. He proves to have great strength and would be an excellent opponent for me to fight. He had a wide grin split across his scarred face. His spiked hair seemed to move with the spirit energy he was giving off. Everyone else in the room was thinking the same thing. The poor boy is not going to be in Kenpachi's division. Naruto didn't fit in with the 6th, 4th, or 5th divisions. Though as they spoke about his traits to see where he best fit, one person was quiet. Soi Fong. Yamamoto said calmly, why are you so quiet? Soi Fong looked up at the old Shinigami. I was thinking about the situation, she said with an almost toneless voice. Naruto proves to be a quick thinker. Good in both Ho-Ho and Zanjutsu, she said, repeating the traits that had been discussed about the whiskered blonde. He has even been able to sneak up on teachers. That is a very high level of stealth. Yamamoto nodded. So do you think he should be placed in your division? He asked, looking at her. When she nodded, he smiled. Then it is settled. From here on, Naruto Uzumaki is in the 2nd division. Kenpachi seemed to be upset as they moved on to other students. Naruto's dorm. A graduation party. Naruto asked, sitting on his bed looking at Rukia and Renji. Yeah man, Renji said, smiling. I already have a date, and she is a smoking hot babe. Naruto laughed as Renji began to tell about his date and Rukia hit him hard on the head. Apparently she had large assets and Naruto guessed Renji had been thinking with his little soul reaper when he had asked the girl out. Rukia was shaking her head. Renji, she said, don't you have to get yours and Naruto's clothes from the laundry room? She smiled as Renji scrambled up and ran out the door with promises of telling Naruto more later. Rukia looked at him. She seemed to be serious about something and was looking for a solution to a problem. Naruto, she finally said. Yes, he asked, watching her. She was fidgeting slightly and wouldn't look him in the eyes. Well, she was red now. I don't have a date for the party tonight and I was wondering if you would go with me, she said quickly. You know, just as friends. She looked away waiting for Naruto's answer. Naruto was amazed that she hadn't gotten a date. In his eyes, Rukia was one of the cutest girls he had seen. And, as of 3 years ago, she was also a noble. Apparently the Kuchiki family had taken an interest in Rukia and had decided to adopt her into their ranks. It had happened 3 months after Naruto had achieved Shikai. Naruto wondered what idiot wouldn't take Rukia to the party as her date. Sure Rukia, he said smiling, he wasn't an idiot. Rukia smiled and hugged him. Thanks Naruto, she said. I have to go pick out a dress. She gave Naruto a quick on the cheek and ran out. The blonde-haired boy smiled as she left. He was happy she was happy. Soon Renji came back with 2 tuxedos smiling. Naruto blinked. Why are we wearing tuxedos? He asked. Because we have to look good for our dates, Renji said smiling. Once you get a date that is, he watched Naruto smile. No way, you didn't? He asked. Yeah, Naruto said. I got a date, but I was gone maybe 13 minutes, Renji said. How could you have gotten a date so quickly? His blonde friend just smiled and said. You'll see who it is at the party. Renji groaned. Fine. He said smiling. Well, let me finish telling you about that hot babe I got. Then he went on a complete rant about the girl. So what is her name? Naruto asked, interrupting him. She is that girl from Kido class, remember? Renji said, earning a puzzled look from his blonde friend. You know, the girl that sits 5 seats behind you? Now Naruto got it. He was speaking of Leona Hearts. The girl was very pretty. She had raven-colored hair that cascaded down to the middle of her back. She had a round face and beautiful emerald eyes. No one except Naruto seemed to notice these traits. They were all focused on the large double DS that were on the girl's chest. Naruto nodded. Leona Hearts, he said. Yeah, that is her name, his red-headed friend said smiling. How do you remember everyone's names? I pay attention, Naruto said, instead of staring at their S. Renji scoffed. Anyway, I probably won't be coming back to the dorm, he said grinning, so you can use it with your date. That made the blonde Shinigami in training blush. Renji wouldn't be saying that if he knew who his date was. Naruto thought about it. Rukia was pretty and nice when she wanted to be. The only reason guys didn't bother with her was because she had a flat chest. But he wasn't sure if he and Rukia would even do that. They were going just as friends. He laid back and listened to Renji talk about what he hoped to happen after the party. With Rukia. Silk? Hinamori Momo asked, looking at Rukia. Why do you need a silk dress? Rukia blushed. I have a date for the party tonight and I want to look good for him, she said, earning a smile from Momo. So who is the lucky guy? She asked, looking at dresses. Well, it is. Rukia was blushing more. Naruto, she said. Momo smiled. That good-looking guy? She asked. Rukia nodded. So can you get me the dress? She asked. Momo nodded. Don't worry, you will have it before the party. With Naruto. Naruto was busy getting his tux set up. It looked like a normal tux, but it had a red tint to it. It wasn't buttoned and let his white shirt hang out. He didn't want to seem too prim. He had wanted to put his hair down, but it wouldn't, so now it just stood spiked at all angles. He heard a knock at the door and walked over to answer it. When he opened the door, he gasped. Rukia was standing there in a light blue dress with white along the edges. Her eyes shone brightly. A light touch of mascara helped her eyes stand out. Hey Naruto, she said quietly. Naruto noticed that she had put on light pink lipstick. Hey, he said. Rukia blushed. Don't stare at me like that, she said. Naruto turned his head, blushing. Sorry, he said. Are you ready to go? She asked, getting a nod from the blonde-haired boy. She smiled. Then let's go. She took Naruto's arm and they walked to the party together. They arrived at the party. It was already in full swing. It was being held in one of the largest rooms in the academy, the training room. Wow, Naruto said, looking around at all of the people and the decorations. You can't even tell it used to be a training room. Rukia nodded her agreement. They found a table in the corner of the room. I'll get us something to drink, Naruto said. All right. Rukia said, smiling. Hurry back. She watched her blonde date nod and walk off. Wow, she heard a female voice say behind her, he looks hot tonight. Rukia twisted around to see Momo. Hey, she said smiling. Yeah, Naruto looks good. So are you planning on taking him back to your dorm later? Momo asked, wiggling her eyebrows. Rukia blushed. Well. Maybe, she said and then sniffed. Momo? Have you been drinking? She asked. Well, maybe just a little bit, Momo said, grinning. While those two talked, Naruto was getting the drinks. They all held the distinct aroma of alcohol in them. Luckily, there were some unopened bottles of water sitting on the table. He guessed some people had thought ahead for this situation. Naruto was sure the other drinks hadn't had alcohol in them in the beginning. Hey man. Renji said, stumbling up. Why are you getting those things? The other drinks are where the fun is. His words were slightly slurred. No thanks, Renji. Naruto said. I am not much of a drinker. He shook his head at his red-haired friend. It seems you are though. Where is your date? Renji grinned. She is at the door. He leaned close and Naruto could smell the alcohol on his breath. We are going back to her dorm. I was just getting a refill on our drinks. He refilled the cups and walked away. Naruto sighed and walked back to Rukia. He thought he saw someone else, but as he got closer he saw there was no one there. Here you go, he said, handing his raven-haired date a bottle. All the other drinks have alcohol? She asked. Naruto nodded. Some people love to do that. It is good someone was smart enough to bring these. He raised his bottle to her. She raised hers back and they both took a drink. They laughed a little and Naruto sat his drink on the table. He held his hand to her. Want to dance? He asked. Rukia smiled and set her drink down. You know this is a slow song, right? She said, taking his hand. Yeah, I know. He led her out and onto the dance floor. He put his hands on her waist and she placed hers on his shoulders. They slowly began to dance to the music. You're a good dancer, she said, looking into his eyes. Thanks. You are too. He looked back. She decided to take a risk and leaned up to him softly. Naruto was surprised but returned the. After a few seconds it broke. That was nice, she said and moved closer to him so she could lay her head on his chest. Naruto set his chin on the top of her head. It was, he whispered. They were now gently swaying to the music. You look beautiful tonight, Rukia, he said. Thank you. She smiled. You look very handsome. Naruto smiled softly. Rukia leaned up to whisper in his ear. I want to spend the night with you, Naruto. We are spending the night right now, he whispered back. Rukia shook her head. Not here, she whispered. I mean in our dorm. She pulled away and took his hand to lead him out. And I mean now. Naruto looked dumbfounded and could only nod as he was led away from the party. He rushed forward and was attacked on all sides. He spun and blocked the attacks aimed at him. At the same time he knocked back his attackers back from him with his feet and legs. With those gone, more masked Shinigami took their place. Naruto gave a fox-like grin and moved like liquid through their ranks, his palms striking their stomachs, backed with a burst of Reiatsu, a little trick he had learned from the Hyuga clan. He never had been able to fully use it without their bloodline, but the chakra training had helped him learn to focus his chakra into bursts. As expected, more took the place of their fallen. Naruto decided to give them a taste of what a real ninja was supposed to be. He vanished with no sound, not even using Shunpo, just his natural speed. One by one he moved behind them and knocked them out, surprise visible in their eyes. He stood there with the unconscious bodies of the black-robed Shinigami. Suddenly he felt a cold presence behind him. This is strong, he thought, slowly turning around. Naruto was met by a blade at his nose. You are good, Soi Fong said calmly. Welcome to the 2nd Division. She turned and walked to her office. Come, she ordered. He looked at all the downed Shinigami. Yes ma'am, he said, deciding not to go against her. He followed her in. I already have a mission for you, she said, holding up a file and handing it to him. Karakura Town? He asked. Why there? Well, when there have been an unusually high activity of hollows there, she said, and as I have learned, a Shinigami has gone missing there as well. Naruto looked up from the file. Who? He asked. He knew Rukia had gone on a mission about 3 weeks ago, and knowing her strength, he knew she should have been back earlier. Rukia'Kuchik, she said, making Naruto frown. You need to go there and see if you can find out what is making all of the hollows appear there and look for Rukia. Naruto nodded. Yes ma'am, he said and left the office. As he walked out of the building he noticed that there were no unconscious Shinigami on the ground. He was now on his way to the human world, Karakura town. Naruto flexed every muscle and joint in his body. I feel like a lead weight, he said. That is normal. Kazuki Urahara said, standing a few feet from him. You have never used a Gigai before. He checked Naruto over. It seems to fit well. Any problems? Naruto shook his head. Once I get used to gravity again, I should be able to move just as well as I used to when I was alive. He was now doing stretches. And how exactly did you move when you were alive? Kazuki asked, slightly intrigued. Let's see, I could jump onto the top of this building with ease. He said, I also had great speed. It was needed by ninja to pursue enemies. So you were a ninja, Kazuki asked, wondering just where this kid had come from. Yes. He looked slightly sad. This passed and he was cheerful again. It was fun, but now I am a Shinigami. The straw hat wearing man nodded. Well, I guess you want to know where you are going to be staying and other things of the like. The whiskered blonde grinned and nodded. Well, you are staying here, he said, handing Naruto a slip of paper, and starting tomorrow you will be attending Karakura High School. Naruto blinked. Wait, he said, are you saying that I have to go back to school? At Kazuki's nod he groaned, well, that sucks. He stood up sighing. All right then, he said, I will see you sometime. He walked out headed for his new place of living. Kazuki could hear him saying, an apartment again. Later, as Naruto walked to his door, the door across the hall opened, revealing a raven-haired girl. Naruto thought she looked tomboyish. Naruto smiled. Hello, he said, I am new here. She looked at him. Hey, she said. I am Tatsuki Arisawa, who are you? I am Naruto Uzumaki, nice to meet you. He held out a hand to her and they shook. She smiled at him. So you are my new neighbor? She asked. I was sure that straw-hatted guy was going to buy it. Well, actually he was buying it for me. He acts as my legal guardian, Naruto said, smiling. So are you going to our school? She asked. He nodded. That is the plan, he said. Well, you should have something in common with Ichigo, she said, more to herself than him. Excuse me? He asked. Oh, sorry, I was thinking of someone you may have something in common with, she said. Ichigo Kurosaki, he has light hair like you. She nodded toward his head. From what I have seen, his hair is an unnatural color, more orange than blonde. Naruto touched his spiked sun-ed hair. Is that so? He said. Well, from where I am from, hair like this is accepted and normal. He smiled. I have seen blonde, blue, black, pink, gray. He counted on his fingers. Long, short, duck butt-shaped, bowl cuts, even hair that defied gravity. She laughed a little when he talked about hair that was duck butt-shaped, strange hairstyles, she said. He nodded and was about to say something when the watch on his wrist began to beep. Crap, he said, looking at her. Listen, I have to go, I'll talk to you later. He waved as he ran off outside instead of walking into his apartment. What a strange guy, she said quietly as she walked the opposite direction. I hope I can get to know him better. Once outside, Naruto popped a white pill into his mouth. There was a flash as he was separated from his body. Take care of my body, he said, earning a yes sir from his body. He looked at his watch. Now which way is the hollow? Reading the indications on the face of the watch, it told him the hollow was off to the right. He ran in that direction. When he was about half the way there, the signal vanished. What the hell? He asked. I need to find out what just happened, he said. There is no reason for a hollow to just vanish like that. He paused, unless it was destroyed. He stopped. He was sure he was near the spot where the hollow had been. He could feel the faint remnants of another Shinigami's Ryotsu. Seems this Shinigami took care of the hollow fairly quickly, but I don't recognize the Ryotsu. While he pondered this, he walked home unaware of the two people headed in the opposite direction, the girl with raven hair complaining about the orange-haired guy's style of fighting. When he walked into the building, he noticed that Tatsuki wasn't there. For some reason he felt saddened by this. He shook his head and opened his door and walked in. He sighed slightly, living alone again. He gave a soft laugh. Oh well. He walked into the bedroom and noticed his body laying on the bed. He chuckled and spun backwards, falling onto the bed and into his body. He opened his eyes and spat the pill out. That was weird, he said. When he had touched his body he felt weird, like falling from a building in your dreams. Standing up, He removed his shirt as he walked to the bathroom. "I need a shower," he said. After his shower, and he was dressed in a black shirt and sweatpants, he made himself some instant ramen. "Never loses its flavor," he said, slurping the noodles down. After he had eaten, he moved to go to sleep. Just before he fell asleep, he had the strangest feeling that something bad was going to happen the next day. He was disoriented when he first awoke. When he got his bearings, he realized he was going to be late for school. He was a blonde blur as he flew through the apartment, getting dressed and getting his things together at the same time. Tatsuki was walking down the street toward the school when she heard something behind her. She turned to see a dust cloud and a blonde head. What she was hearing was Naruto saying repeatedly, "Crap, crap, crap, crap." She laughed. "Hey Naruto," she called when he flew past her. Skidding to a stop, he turned and walked back to her. "Hey," he said. "You aren't tired?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Why should I be?" She shook her head. "You were incredible. You were just running at an impossible speed and you were not even winded." She laughed, seeing his puzzled expression. "Not everyone can do that, not even me, and I go to karate." Naruto nodded. "I figured you did some sort of exercise. You have such a great physique." She blushed at his compliment. "Thank you," she said. "Do you work out?" she asked, looking at his black shirt that lay under the unzipped jacket that was a mixture of black and orange. He nodded. "I like to stay fit," he said. She nodded back. "I see that," she thought. "You know, I thought I was going to be late for school," he said. "I must have set my clock wrong." "No, you are," she said plainly. "I don't mind being late, so I walk to school like this all the time." Naruto smiled. It looked like a mixture of a smile and a grimace. Perfect. "Hey, don't get so down," she patted him on the shoulder. "It is not unusual for people to be late on their first day to school." "Right," he said, smiling. "Let's get going." He began to walk a little faster. She shook her head as they entered the school. "Well, you better go to the office to get your room number and other things." He nodded. "I'll see you later," he said, walking off into the direction of the office. Tatsuki gave a soft smile as she quickly moved to class. Naruto had gotten the number of his class about 10 minutes later and was headed in that direction. "I wonder who I am going to meet her." He walked into the room and straight up to the teacher without looking at the class. He handed him a note that told his name and why he was late. "Ah," the teacher said. "Class, this is our new student, Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto turned to face the class and froze. Sitting a few feet in front of him was none other than Rukia'Kuchik. "Nice to meet you all," he said, walking to a seat in the back of the room and sat down. He noticed that Rukia's eyes had followed him, wide with surprise. He looked to the left of her and saw a boy with bright, orange hair. That must be Ichigo, he thought. Tatsuki was right. His hair is more orange than blonde. To the right of Rukia he saw a rather large person. He had dark, short, messy hair and a dark complexion. Even though he was big, to Naruto he seemed to be more gentle than his appearance would show. Farther to the right, Naruto spotted an uptight-looking boy with rectangle-shaped glasses. Naruto guessed he was the type of person that was taught respect at a young age. While he was looking around, he saw Tatsuki and a girl with rather large eyes sitting next to her. The girl was orange-haired and had an expression of carefreeness, but under that was a person who was thoughtful and could be intelligent if she wanted to. Naruto was amazed at how easy these people were to read. It was like they had no practice in hiding their thoughts. The only people, besides Rukia and himself, who were good at hiding their thoughts were the dark-skinned guy, Ichigo, and, he was not sure about her, Tatsuki. His eyes moved back to Ichigo and had to hold back a laugh. The guy's Ryotsu just stood out, letting whoever wanted to see it. Under his amusement he was somewhat surprised. The Ryotsu was very powerful and large. He hadn't even noticed it. He was too focused on everyone else to actually look for it. He did notice the strength though. This guy was almost strong enough to be at vice captain level. He was pretty close to Naruto. This surprised Naruto greatly. From what he could tell, this person called Ichigo had no training at all in being a Shinigami, and yet he had tremendous power that just flowed from him. The blonde Shinigami was so focused on this, he didn't notice the bell ring, not even that people were standing up to go to lunch, until Tatsuki was shaking him slightly. "Wow, you looked deep in thought," she said when he finally looked at her. "Well, you can think later. I want you to meet everyone," She led him out to where the others were standing. "This," she said, introducing him, "is Naruto. He lives in the apartment next to mine." "It is nice to meet friends of Tatsuki," Naruto said, holding out his hand. The first person to take it was the girl who had been sitting next to Tatsuki. "Hi, my name is Orihime Inoue," she said, happily shaking his hand. The next person to shake his hand was the large dark-skinned guy. "My name is Yasutora Sato," he said in a deep voice. "Just call me Chad." Naruto nodded and looked at Ichigo. "And you?" "Ichigo Kurosaki," he said, not taking Naruto's hand. "Somebody is a sour puss," Naruto thought, making a slight face. Rukia saw this and giggled. "Hey Rukia," he said, turning to her. Everyone looked at Rukia. "You know him?" Ichigo asked. "Yes," she said. "We are from the same place," Naruto said. "Rukia came earlier than I did." Rukia nodded her agreement, then both Naruto's and Rukia's watch started to beep. "Got to go, guys," Naruto said, waving as he ran off. Once away from them, he popped in his pill. Ichigo and Rukia also said goodbye, and Ichigo used Kon. Naruto, now knowing what to look for, quickly caught up to the two. Ichigo took one look at him, then turned on Rukia. "He is a Shinigami too?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Naruto said. "Is that a problem?" Ichigo shook his head and continued to move. Rukia looked at Naruto. "So why are you here now?" she asked. Naruto smiled. "I procrastinated on my paperwork to get into my division." He rubbed the back of his head. Rukia shook her head. "It figures you would," she said with a small smile. "It is just like you." The stopped and Naruto looked around. "Ichigo, take that way." Rukia pointed down the street. "Naruto and I will take this way." She pointed in the opposite direction. Ichigo nodded and ran off. Naruto looked at Rukia. "We need to catch up. You have been gone almost a month." They went down the street. Ichigo soon met someone. "My name is Uryu Ishida," the boy said. "I am a Quincy." Naruto froze. "Do you feel that?" he asked, and saw Rukia nodding. Suddenly hollows began to appear by the dozens. Naruto was instantly ready. "Why don't you leave that Gigai?" he asked, blocking a hollow's claws. "I can't," she said. "I am too weak. Let's talk about this later." She was firing blue balls at the hollows. Naruto nodded and continued to fight. Why did all these hollows just suddenly appear? He thought, this isn't natural. Rukia was surrounded by a mob of hollows and Naruto did his best to defend her. Suddenly everything was quiet, aside from the dripping of water. Naruto opened his eyes. "Why am I here?" he asked. "Use my power, Kit." The deep voice came from the door to his right. "Fox?" he asked. "Who else?" The door swung open to reveal the Kyuubi's large red slitted eye. "Why do you want me to use your power?" Naruto asked. "This is like when I was alive." The large demon chuckled. "If you don't, then your mate will die," he said. "How about this? I will only give you a little, enough so you can fight, but not so much you will lose control." Naruto thought about it for a few minutes. "I won't lose control?" he asked. The slight movement of the eye told him the fox was smiling. "That is right." He sighed. "All right," he said, "let's get it over with." He watched as the red energy flowed toward him, and right before it touched him, Naruto wondered if it would change him in a different way than it had when he was alive. He felt it as it pulsed through his body. His eyes glowed red and slitted. "Rise, Shiryo Kitsune." He released his Zanpakuto 2 and then he let all hell loose on the hollows. His body blurred as he moved along the ring of hollows, his claws flashing and slicing through masks. He turned and sliced down 2 hollow bodies, cutting them through. He ran his tongue along his elongated canines. His red eyes looked at the vanishing bodies of the dead hollows. More came at him and he whirred into motion and used his claws to split the hollows into tiny pieces. He turned around and saw that there were no more hollows. His gaze landed on Rukia and his eyes relaxed back into their normal bright blue. He walked over to her. "What was that?" she asked. "That was something from my past," he said, looking away. "Let's find Ichigo," he said. She nodded and followed him. When they reached the place where Ichigo and Ishida stood, they saw a Manos Grande. "It is a Sero," Rukia yelled to the 2 boys when she saw the glowing ball form. "Get out of there," Naruto yelled, but it was too late. The Sero hit the 2 boys dead on. Naruto froze. No way, he said, watching as Ichigo pushed the Sero back with his giant Zanpakuto 2. He watched as Ichigo actually sent the attack back at the Manos Grande. He watched as it cut deep into the large hollow. The hollow moved back into the rift it had created. Naruto looked at the fallen Ichigo. This guy may have some potential, he said quietly. Later, once everyone was settled and okay, Naruto traveled home with Tatsuki. Well, today has been interesting, she said. Naruto nodded. I feel like I could sleep for a week, he laughed. She gave a small laugh. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, she said. He nodded and walked into his apartment and laid down on his bed. What is this? He reached into his shirt and touched something cool and hard. When he pulled it out, he gasped. It was a fox-shaped hollow mask. It had black tips on its ears and red rings around its eyes. The mask had sharp teeth and elongated canines. It seemed to be grinning at him. Naruto groaned and set the mask on his dresser. What is going on? He asked as he laid down. He thought he heard laughter as he fell asleep. Dark, demon fox laughter. It was quiet. Very quiet. His mind felt foggy and he couldn't remember something. What couldn't he remember? He kept getting flashes, but his thoughts were pushed aside by a terrible hunger. This hunger was different from another hunger. One that he couldn't remember. He placed his paw. He had a large white paw and it was pressed against a hole in his chest. He knew that this was strange, but he couldn't remember why. He slowly stood up, feeling shaky and uncoordinated. He stumbled, but a large white tail with a black tip held him up, keeping him from falling over. Glancing over his shoulder, which was spiky and looked like white fur going down his back. In fact, it was all over his body. His paws were tipped by large black claws. He saw that he had 3 other tails, each matching the first one. He slowly began to walk forward, looking around. This place he was in looked barren, like a large white desert. He saw something shine and leaned down toward it. It was a smooth stone, polished so well that it was reflective. His face was odd. It was a white fox mask with black rings around the eyes and black-tipped fox ears pointing backwards. The face had a devilish smile, one that promised pain. He flinched back and moved away from the reflective surface. In the eyeholes of the mask he had seen the only thing that looked kind. He had bright blue eyes, though they were in slits. There was a sharp sting in his chest where the hole was. He felt it, the hunger. He felt the mask's mouth open in response to his own as he let out a low growl, bringing his face down to the desert ground, breathing in the scent and feeling the energy of the creature he wanted. It was a small worm-like creature, which he easily devoured, only feeling a small amount of guilt for doing it. This simple meal caused the pain in his chest to dull, and he remembered his name. Naruto. His voice had a strange quality, as if it were echoing. With that sudden memory, he felt the hunger return even worse. He groaned softly and clutched his chest, feeling it burn. Looking around, he moved, rushing across the vast expanse of land, looking for more to eat, more to remember. 3 years later, with a satisfying rip, the hollow's arm came off and he swallowed it whole with a satisfying rumble in his chest. He continued to eat until the creature was completely gone. He had learned about where he was and what he was from other hollows, usually ones who tried to eat him, and obviously failed. Each time he consumed the other hollows, he gained some memories back, also feeling his own power increasing. He knew he needed more power. He had become stronger even faster than he could have believed. But with the constant creatures he consumed, he felt their minds all fighting to consume his own. But he showed his power and strength and forced them all back. Soon, they fell silent and he continued to grow. Around this time he met the Ajukas Grimjow and his crew. To say the other hollow was a little rude was an understatement. He was very rude, but he was a hard worker and that appealed to Naruto. From how he also treated his friends, he saw that Grimjow was also very loyal. Naruto and Grimjow, while constantly at each other's throats, were a good team, able to take down any foe, no matter how big the hollow was. As much strength they had, and the amount of hollows they took down, they caused more damage to each other. It started with a simple training match to test their strength, then it built up and soon, they were tossing around each other like rag dolls. Naruto had once almost lost a tail in a battle. He actually lost a big piece of his mask, restoring a ton of memories of a village and a pink-haired girl. But he didn't want to live through that again. It was too painful a feeling in his face, as if he were tearing off his own face. So Naruto left the group, off to go his own way. His growth in power was a slow one without the other hollow, but he got stronger until one day, he found a strange building in the middle of the desert. It looked like a castle. He had never seen things like this in Hueco Mundo. Naruto silently crept forward, his ears trained for any sound, his tail searching for a disturbance in the still air. As soon as he stepped over what could be only known as the property line, he felt the sudden pressure on his body, bearing down on him, making it hard for him to move even his tails. Then he felt it, a sudden movement behind him. He flipped forward, with a little difficulty, and landed facing the person behind him. It was a very beautiful woman with green hair and what looked like a goat's skull resting on her head. He blinked, she was the one giving off such a massive power? The woman looked confused at how fast he was able to move away from her. She moved toward him, blurring as she vanished toward him. His eyes flared red for a second as he vanished, spinning rapidly away from her as her fist slammed into the ground, causing it to crack. She glanced at him in surprise and was suddenly gone. Naruto looked around, she had just gone a lot faster. She was instantly in front of him and his tail slammed into the ground, pulling him back from her, her fist an inch away from his mask. He knew that if that fist was allowed to make contact with his head, it would split both his mask and his head in two. His claws struck her skin, but it felt harder than his own. She hit him in the chest and he went flying back with a gasp of pain. He felt his knees give out as he struck the ground with more force than he could imagine. He had never felt that much strength hit him. She rushed forward and her sword was drawn. He saw she meant to finish him off quickly. He felt it in his chest, the energy surge. Don't give up, Kit. Destroy her. The dark voice roared in his head as his eyes turned bright crimson and his tails fed forward and he fired a blast from his mouth. With the aid of the power coming from him, he had charged a Sero in no time. The woman was so surprised, she was actually hit and thrown far back. She stood up, seemingly unfazed, and saw that this hollow was getting ready to fire another. She prepared to reflect it back with her own Sero. Naruto's Sero began to grow bigger and bigger before it shrunk and he swallowed it. His body expanded quickly and he released the supercharged Sero. Her eyes nearly popped from the sockets when she saw this. She immediately changed her tactic and vanished quickly. This hollow wasn't using just his Ryotsu to battle her, she felt something deeper within him. Then she saw a man appear behind the hollow. Tosen, she said softly as he released his blade and stopped the hollow with ease. He then looked up at her. He is wanted alive, he could prove useful. Then the Shinigami was gone. She shook her head. Geez, with my luck, I am going to end up training him. She picked up the hollow with ease and vanished. Several years later, around the time the Shinigami Naruto left the academy. Naruto sighed as he finished his transformation. It had taken a while to prove himself to Sosuke Azean, the apparent leader of the Arankars. He was now allowed to become one himself. He flexed his fingers and then felt every one of his memories return. He remembered everything, why he became a hollow, and even the other Naruto. He also knew why they had split into two beings. Flashback right after the battle when one Naruto was sent to the Soul Society. Another one was sitting against a tree, hidden from the Shinigami. He waited until they left. This hidden Naruto knew why they had split. The power of the Kyuubi, along with the seal the fourth had created, the power had been split evenly between the two, giving each of them 4 tails. The final tail was saved for when they recombined. If they ever did. Once he was sure he was safe, he walked out to look at his body. He sat next to it and frowned deeply. This was all of the villagers' faults. This was his parents' fault. This was everyone's fault. They had treated him badly and forced him to train himself. They never helped him and stunted his growth and his sense of style. Naruto shook his head, grabbing at the chain hooked to his chest and roared out. This was Sakura's fault for not being stronger, for being so useless for so long, just following everyone else and Sasuke. That stupid pink-haired girl, she needed everyone else to deal with her problems. His anger flared and fed the chains. He was watching them eat away at themselves, very quickly. Then there was Sasuke. That retarded, brooding boy. He was nothing but trouble. His brother should have killed him with the rest of their miserable clan. Naruto was also angry at himself for being so weak. With a hard yank, he ripped the chain from his chest with a pained yell as he quickly formed into a hollow. the same form we would later see in Hawako Mundo. The hollow-eyed Naruto knew there was one thing he wanted to devour only one soul. With a quick movement, he was headed, following the telltale signature of the curse seal, a dark poison mixed with chakra. He moved around for days, searching for the Uchiha. When he found him, he was asleep. "Wake up, Teme," he growled into the boy's ear. When the last Uchiha didn't stir, he brought his claws down and ripped the soul from the body. He chuckled darkly as Sasuke looked at him with surprise. "It is nice to see a look other than boredom on your smug face." He moved closer. "You killed me, and now I am here to repay the favor." "Naruto?" the raven-haired boy asked, staring at this large monster fox. "That is right, say bye-bye to those pretty eyes." Then, Naruto devoured Sasuke's soul with more ease than he imagined. He laughed at the fact that Sasuke had been so weak compared to him now. "Not so tough now, are you?" He looked at the lifeless body and grinned as he stepped over to it and opened his smiling Mosk's mouth. With a self-satisfied belch, he finished eating the physical body as well. With that, he felt massively more powerful. His new dark body had absorbed the curse seal so easily and had destroyed it by absorbing the power it held. That is when he felt the Shinigami coming toward him. Naruto ripped a hole, using most of his current energy, into Hawako Mundo. Once he jumped in, everything went black. End of flashback. Now he knew why he had become a hollow. He had forgiven everyone, even Sasuke. But now he had someone new to hate. Aizen. This man was everything Akatsuki and Orochimaru represented in one being. This man was everything he hated, everything he and the other Naruto hated. He had a new goal. He would refuse with the other Naruto and kill Sosuke Aizen. He would enjoy splitting the man's head in two and destroying his heart. He walked away with his new position as Neliel II Odelschwank's newest Frasium, to which the woman only nodded as if she had suspected it. He shook his head. He knew how powerful Nell was. He was amazed that he had almost beaten her. There was no way he could do it again. The Arrancar Naruto Uzumaki grinned darkly as he continued to plan Aizen's death and his rejoining with the Shinigami Naruto. Sweat rolled off his Shinigami form, running upwards towards his face and then following the line of his hair to land on the floor. It always amazed him that he could still sweat even if he was technically a spirit. What made this type of training was even though he was training here in his apartment, he was also in his mind training against Shiryo Kitsune. It was not as simple as it sounded. Currently, he was resting his pointer finger on the point of his sword, pushing his Ritsu directly to his finger and nowhere else. It was all he could do to not fall onto his own sword, as in his mind, he was pummeled by said sword. "Come on, Naruto." Shiryo giggled as she caused another nick on his legs. "You are moving so slow." She moved away from his swing. The blonde Shinigami growled. "Who could move with his mind split? I have to make sure my body does as fall and spear itself on you while I fight you. I have split vision." He looked at her, though only his left eye took in the mindscape, and at times, I will only see one or the other. My apartment room or my mindscape. He frowned. "I think you know when I am looking at my room." Shiryo shrugged. "I may or I may not," she said softly. This training had a reason. It was designed to teach the blonde boy to pay attention to what was around him while at the same time paying attention to something completely different. At the same time, it was also the beginning of his own Bankai training. So far, he couldn't get a hold of the training. Naruto cursed as he almost fell onto the blade again. He glanced up, both out his window and at Shiryo. For a second he relaxed and everything slid into place. He could suddenly see Shiryo in his apartment, even while the smell and feel of rose petals moved around them. He felt a strange energy beginning to unlock deep within him. Then there was a loud rumble and he lost his concentration and overbalanced. Falling, he slipped all the way back into reality and opened up a large gash on his palm. Sighing, he gently began to heal his palm using his Kikatsu. The fourth division was handy, but this Kido was great when there were none around. There was a light knock at his door and he looked up. Wonder who that could be? As easily as stepping into a pool, he slid back into his body, which had been laying on the bed since the beginning of his training. Slipping on a pair of pants, he walked to the door and opened it up, surprised to see Tatsuki. "Hey," he said smiling. "I am sorry to bother you," she said, not really looking that sorry, but I heard a loud thump. "Oh," he grinned, doing his best to look embarrassed. "That was me. I fell out of my bed," he chuckled. She laughed. Well, that is surprising. You seem like the type who would be very well balanced. She was still smiling when she said, you should get dressed, cause school is starting soon. School. Naruto ran around his messy apartment, looking for all of his stuff. Why the hell was there school? Just the other day, he had a ton of freaking hollows. As this was going through his head, he was stripping down and changing into his school clothes. Don't they know that he is granted a few days of rest? He missed the ninja academy. You got to leave when you were 12, then the rest of it was a lot of fighting. Once he was ready, he walked up to Tatsuki. He saw that her cheeks were slightly red. He wondered why until he thought about it. He hadn't shut the door. And he had changed down into his boxers directly in front of her. We should go now, he said softly, now feeling actually embarrassed. Why yeah, she said, walking ahead of him. Despite his embarrassment, he couldn't help checking her out from behind as he followed her. For a small girl, she was pretty well built. She had well-toned legs, strong legs. Unbidden, the image of those legs wrapped around his waist came to his mind. Quickly shaking his head, a second image came up. This one was of Rukia. Putting the two girls together, he could see the differences in them. While Rukia was small, Tatsuki was only slightly bigger than her. In the chest area, Tatsuki was around a B cup while Rukia was as flat as a board. He didn't mind her flatness, but it wasn't like he didn't like larger S. He liked them just fine. Of course, his observations of her body didn't go past Tatsuki. She knew he was checking her out and decided to pretend not to notice. She liked it. For some strange reason, not many guys were attracted by her. She had no idea why. Orihime had tried to explain that it was because she came on a little strong, but she didn't want to act weak, cause if she did then people would walk all over her like they tried to do to Orihime. She had to be tough for her friend as well as herself. A small thought entered her head, one that she didn't normally have, though. I wouldn't mind it if Naruto wanted to be on top of me. She felt the heat rise in her face and made sure not to look at the blonde. She felt the heat between her legs and tried to think of something else. Anything else. But nothing but Naruto in his boxers filled her mind. Thank God, she thought, seeing the school. With a half wave, she ran off toward where she could see her orange-haired female friend waiting. Naruto blinked and shrugged. He needed to talk to Ichigo anyway and went off looking for the orange-haired boy. He wanted to find out how he had been able to hold back Asero at his level. There was no possible way. Boy hadn't even learned how to use his Shikai yet. Oddly enough, he couldn't find either him or Rukia. It was odd. Searching around, he found that their friends hadn't seen them around either. Naruto wondered if Kazuki knew where they were. He would have to ask him after school. It was best to keep up appearances in case he needed to stay here longer than usual. All through class, Naruto couldn't help but look at Tatsuki, and looking at her led to fantasies. Romantic fantasies and UAL fantasies were the most abundant fantasies running through his mind. Unknown to him, the girl he was thinking about was also focused on him. Blood pounded through her body as she had hot fantasies about him. She was very close to jumping his bones in the middle of class. She blinked, trying to figure out why she was feeling this way. It couldn't have been just because he was paying attention to her. Something about him did something to her, something deep inside of her opened. It was like he had the key to her body. Oh, if she only knew. After school, she headed home to think about what was happening to her body. Naruto headed to talk to Kazuki. Ah, Naruto. The man said when Naruto came into his shop. I expected you days ago. Where have you been? Naruto looked confused. What do you mean? I just came to ask where are Rukia and Ichigo. Kazuki blinked, looking bewildered. You mean you haven't heard? I figure you being part of Sarate you would have known before anyone. This was bad. If Naruto didn't know, then Rukia was in even more trouble than they had first guessed. Naruto. Rukia was taken to Sarate and I believe that they planned to execute her for giving Ichigo her Shinigami powers. Actually, I am sure. Naruto blinked and then grew angry. At first it was toward Ichigo, and then it was at his fellow Shinigami. He knew most of them, how they could stand by and let Rukia be killed. He couldn't believe it. Kazuki was still talking. I have taken Ichigo to be trained and activate his Shikai. I propose you do the same and get stronger. He gave a small smile. I know you are going to want to go get her. Naruto nodded and walked back out. He was going to go looking for hollows soon to vent his anger on. Sadly, There were no hollows around at the time. Though as the sun went down, something new was beginning to show up. Naruto was sitting on the roof of a building overlooking the town. Under him a dark figure crept along the ground. Naruto noticed the figure and was intrigued. The person had a powerful ritsu flowing from them. He frowned and jumped down, following the figure silently to see where they went. By the shape of the person's body, he could assume that it was either a girl or a really good-looking guy. It wasn't the first time he mistook a guy for a girl. Suddenly the person stopped and turned toward him. What he saw made him gasp. First off, he could see through the form-fitting leotard she wore, so it was a girl. The suit was wrapped from her neck to her toes, and even if the suit looked flimsy, to Naruto's eyes, he could see that the clothes could withstand an incredible amount of blows. He wasn't even sure if his sword would puncture the suit. What really surprised him was the mask she was wearing. It was fox-shaped and white with black lines racing from the eyes down toward the nose and back again. It was a mask he had become very acquainted with. He had worn it himself for a while. It was an Anbu mask, specifically his fox mask, the one that had been given to him when he had joined the Anbu for a little while. It must have been passed down through generations of Anbu to reach this girl. It was amazing. Suddenly, Naruto felt spiked chains wrapping around him. It was only because of his reflexes was he able to form a small film of ritsu along his skin. He could feel the small barbs pressing against the ritsu. Another of the figure was behind him, holding the chains by their ends, Kage Bushin. Naruto thought, his eyes widening. With a quick flash step he was behind the first girl and gripping the mask. With a sharp tug he pulled it off. Black hair hit the base of his nose and he turned the girl around. But before he could see her face, she poofed away. Another clone, he said softly. Girl, you are way out of your league, he said grinning. Standing up tall he closed his eyes, focusing. He held out his hands. Hakafuku, white crawl. He said softly. This caused a wave of ritsu to flow outward from him. With a burst, he let it flood all around him. He heard several poofs as several clones dissipated. There was only one thump and it came from his right. A quick search and he found the girl. He knelt down and touched the mask, gently lifting it, seeing the black hair before seeing the face and gasping. Tatsuki. He asked blinking. What the hell? Why was Tatsuki using ninjutsu? It confused him greatly. The girl didn't look like the type to use jutsu. And how the hell did she mold ritsu into the jutsu? He had been trying to figure out how to do that for years. Shaking his head, he lifted her up and began to walk. He might as well take her home and act like nothing had happened. While he did this he also wondered how she had seen him. He had left his Gigai back at his apartment laying in his bed. Did this mean she had always been able to see him and just pretended not to? Damn, this was confusing. Without thinking, he moved right through the walls of their apartment. He then wondered why he could do that with her. His eyes widened. Maybe her body isn't really hers at all. He wondered quietly. He quickly slipped into her room and saw her body laying there. Odd. This body still breathes, unlike a Gigai which is nothing but a doll. A powerful jutsu was placed on her family. He thought calmly. One that sealed ninja skills into her spirit. He was now beginning to think aloud. He gently lowered the spirit part of her into the physical one. Her body glowed softly before she settled deeper into sleep. Who did this jutsu? He asked silently as he checked over her. When he checked her neck he saw something very strange. A small birthmark that looked very familiar rested on her neck. Where had he seen this mark before? His mind then flashed back to Anko. No way. He covered his mouth laughing silently. Tatsuki is the descendant of Anko? And the curse mark, while diluted, traveled down the line? He chuckled even more. Great. I always did have a crush on Anko. Guess it is only right that I would fall for her descendant. He thought about it. So because of the seal being in her system, it turned her soul into a ninja one. He grinned. A ninja soul. She would show those second division ninjas what for. I wonder if she knows. I will talk to her about it tomorrow. He walked back toward his room, taking one last glance toward the sleeping girl. Today may have started badly, but it turned out pretty well. Screams, roars. The air was full of sounds that asphalted his ears. His eyes snapped open, fire flowing all around him, ing at his skin as if trying to find a way in. His room was gone, leaving him staring at the night sky. He saw Rukia jump backwards, running from something. He saw his other friends soon follow afterwards. Then the giant orange claw raked through the air and grabbed them all. In an instant, Naruto leapt forward into the air, shedding his body and wielding his Zanpakuto. He stumbled back in surprise at what he saw. The nine-tailed fox was in the middle of the city, its 9 tails swaying behind it. The creature grinned at him, the ruby-colored eyes sparkling. Naruto. The fox's voice was as deep as always. You were weak. You can never hope to contain me forever. The beast chuckled with amusement. Naruto growled and twisted his blade. Rise. Shiryo Kitsune, he said calmly, activating his Shikai. In a burst of speed, he was rushing forward, kicking off buildings as he raced toward the demon fox. His incredible speed was no match for the 9 tails that slammed him back every time he got close to the fox. He slammed his fist into the rooftop, sending rocks flying up. Rapidly he punched the rocks through the air, aiming for the monster's eyes. It laughed as and snapped the rocks into its gaping maw. A blue flame formed at the tip of one tail which fed forward and missed Naruto by a fraction. Then all 9 tails lit up with blazing blue flames and began to move backwards, preparing to shoot them forward. There was a sudden clap of thunder as something struck the side of the creature's head. A boy landed next to Naruto, his blonde hair blowing in the wind that his impact had created. 4 bone-like tails twisted behind him, all pointed to the fallen fox, as if waiting for the beast to get back up. As he turned his head, it could be seen that a fox-like mask rested on his face, his glowing red eyes looking through the eye holes. He fixed his eyes on the blonde Shinigami. Naruto, he said softly, his voice calm. It is interesting that we would meet like this, he chuckled. Naruto blinked. Who are you, Hollow? He asked, sizing up the boy. He was wearing something that resembled his old ninja attire. But instead of orange and black, it was white and black. The jacket was open, showing his bare chest and the hole on his stomach. The boy's eyes moved, showing that he was smiling. He reached up and touched the mask. With ease, he removed it, a familiar face coming into view. Naruto stumbled back, but... how? The second Naruto grinned. That big creature over there in our dad's seal. A spark of realization crossed over the Shinigami's face. I think the pervy sage once told me something about that. He said. The 4th seal split the 9-tailed fox's power into halves. Yin and yang. He shook his head. I never expected that it would work out this way. The Hollow shook his head. Neither did I, and I only realized this when I got all of my memories back upon becoming an Arankar. I can say that it is weird seeing myself as a Hollow, the blue-eyed boy said. There is no way I could be evil, not in a million years. Feels like it has been that long, the other one said. But yeah, I am not evil. I am trying to get rid of someone who is worse than Orochimaru and the Akatsuki combined. Incredible. Who could be worse than the both of them? The hollow-eyed Naruto turned and pointed to the fox, now back on its feet. On top of the fox was a man, though to the blue-eyed Naruto, the man's face was blurred. He turned to the other Naruto. Who is he? He asked. The red-eyed boy spoke, but Naruto didn't hear the name. He is. The boy himself seemed surprised. I can't say his name, he mumbled. He then shook his head. Never mind that for now, we need to combine. We need our full power for what is coming. Naruto shook his head. I can't do that. I don't even know how. He ran his clawed fingers through his hair. The other Naruto's tails twitched. To tell you the truth, all we have to do is touch. They began to feel air pulling them away from each other. They tried forcing themselves away from it, but it did no good. He shook his head. Listen, we are not supposed to be separate. Once we touch, the universe will do the rest. He held out his hand, his tails slamming into the ground to slow his progression. Naruto growled at the force that was pulling at him. Fine. He turned his blue eyes back to the other boy, his armor turning back into his sword as he reached out his hand toward him. Their hands touched, a blinding white light spreading out, surrounding the both of them. His head went spiraling and he felt as though he was falling. He could hear a banging from somewhere away from him. He heard his own voice, like a whisper in his head. Come find me, Naruto, we must become one again. Then his eyes snapped open. With a surprised yelp, he fell from his bed and quickly stood up, looking around. Everything looked normal, no destruction. Then the banging began. Naruto. He heard a girl's voice yell through his door. Come on, Open up. He hurried to the door and opened it, seeing Tatsuki's smiling face in front of him. Hey sleepyhead, she said and looked down, her face turning red. Well, at least one of you is awake. The blond boy looked down and blushed at his tented boxers before covering himself. Oh, it is just my body, it is natural. He turned to find himself some clothes. Hey, listen, Tatsuki said sitting on his bed. I had a weird dream about you, she said softly. Naruto blinked and looked at her, wondering if she was talking about the day before. She then laughed. I was a ninja and you were some kind of, I don't know, spirit warrior? She shrugged. Anyway, we fought and you majorly kicked my butt. Sighing, Naruto sat next to her. Actually, that wasn't a dream. He looked at her sheepishly. We did fight, you just fought me in your sleep. The black-haired girl ed her head. Explain Naruto, she said sternly. He ran his fingers through his hair and took a deep breath. Then he began to explain to her about everything, from his life in the past to how he became a Shinigami, to how he came to be here. He even told her about herself. Though he told her of his relationship with Rukia, he left out the part of them having. Then I was told that Rukia had been taken back to Sarate to be executed for giving Ichigo her Shinigami powers. He shook his head, so I have to go help. Tatsuki was trying to wrap her head, though what really got to her was that he had a relationship with Rukia. She sighed and laid back. So, you are a ninja from the past, and I am the descendant of a ninja you were friends with? Well, we were a little more than friends. He shook his head. I had a thing for her and now I have a thing for her descendant. She blinked, surprised that he would say this. Then she noticed that he was still talking. Apparently he hadn't noticed that he was talking out loud. How can you like two girls at once? She asked. He stopped and blushed. Well, actually, in my time, if you were the last of a clan, you could take more than one lover, as many as you needed to restore your clan. Naruto looked at her. I guess it just comes naturally to me. He shrugged. And it isn't like I love one girl more than another. I like you as much as I like Rukia. He then thought of his attraction to Soi Fong. Tatsuki grinned. All right. I can live with that as long as Rukia can. And any other girls you take into your harem. She laughed when he blushed. She then became serious. So how can I help save Rukia? She asked. He blinked. Well, I suppose I could bring you with me to Kazuki Urahara's shop. He is going to train me in Ichigo. I suppose he won't mind if you train with us. He smiled. She nodded. All right. So give me one of those pills to get my ninja body out. She looked around. Where are they? She asked. He held up the Pez dispenser and popped out 2 pills, handing one to her. He swallowed his and fell back onto his bed. She looked around expecting him to be standing there, then remember that he had told her that those with no spiritual awareness could see Shinigami or hollows. Quickly, she put the pill into her mouth and swallowed it. What followed was a tingling sensation. Then she was standing in front of Naruto. He grinned. So it did work, he said smiling at her. She looked at herself in a mirror and blinked at the full-body black and mask she wore. She pulled the mask up onto her head. This feels weird. But I think I can handle it. He nodded and took her hand, leaping at the wall. Naruto laughed when she screamed as they passed through the wall to land on the roof of another building. Spirit forms, remember? He chuckled. She gave him a dirty look as she pulled the mask back into place. Let's just go, she said. He grinned as they headed toward Urahara's. When they reached the shop, Naruto led her in and explained the situation to Kazuki. The straw hat-wearing man was excited at this turn of events. You will be training with the others, he told her, and Naruto here will be training with Ichigo. Once Ichigo regains his powers. She blinked. Others? She asked and he shook his head, giving her instructions to the place she would be training in. With slight annoyance, she gave Naruto a on the cheek before replacing her mask and running off. Naruto blushed under Kazuki's stare and followed the man to the basement. He was explaining that Ichigo was in the process of regaining his Shinigami powers. So while he waited for Ichigo to come out of his hole, Naruto began to train. He was trying to achieve Bankai, but was still lacking the power needed. He practiced his sword skills and his shunpo for the next 3 days. When Ichigo finally recovers his powers, Kazuki challenges him. Naruto watched with amusement as Ichigo had his butt handed to him. He is still very weak, even his Zanpakuto was broken. It was when Ichigo released his Shikai that Naruto was impressed. especially since he was actually able to knock off Urahara's hat. Then it was Naruto's turn to train with Ichigo. Naruto stood brandishing his blade, flat side facing the ground. "So tell me, are all your Zanpakuto's forms this big?" he asked. Ichigo gave him a strange look. "What does that mean?" he asked. The blonde boy shook his head. "Each Zanpakuto has 3 forms." He cut through the air. "This is the basic form, for most of us, though your basic form was larger than normal." He looked at Ichigo's black sword. "The next is the released form, which can be obtained by knowing your Zanpakuto's name." Ichigo nodded, taking in this information. Naruto grinned and rushed the orange-haired boy, resulting in his blocking of Naruto's attack. The clang of metal filled the area. "The final form can only be achieved through years of training," he said as they began to fight. Naruto noted that Ichigo was very fast, faster than he was without releasing his Zanpakuto. Naruto spun, knocking Ichigo back and grinned. "Rise. Shiryo Kitsune." The power exploded from him, spinning up dust. Before the dust even settled, Naruto leapt out at Ichigo, his clawed armor slamming into the flat of Ichigo's blade. They began to move, each of their attacks never making contact. The power of their fighting was driving deep cuts into the ground around them. They continued to fight for days, only stopping to rest and rejuvenate. Then it was back to fighting and ruining Kazuki's training ground. From time to time, Naruto would feel the fox's energy flow through him, giving him an advantage. But he could also see a strange, but familiar energy within Ichigo. It made him wonder if there were other beings out there with hollows inside of them. During this time, Kazuki was getting ready to open the gate to the Sarate. Naruto had his own way of getting back. He could use the normal means to get there quickly. But if he was going to help, he couldn't be seen with them. So when it was time to leave, Naruto sent a message back to Sarate to open a gate for him. Before he left, Tatsuki ran up to him and pulled her mask off, grinning at him. She threw her arms around him and eyed him deeply. "Just something I can fight for," she said softly before going through the gate. The blonde ignored Kazuki's look and went outside to open his own gate. As he walked through the gate, he wondered if he would be able to activate his Bankai. He felt confident that he had enough power to do so, but he was unsure if he could do it. Then his mind turned toward the dream he had. "Another me," he said softly, "and someone who is more dangerous than anyone I have ever fought against." He chuckled. "I couldn't know what is more dangerous than fighting the entire Sarate." He grinned as he walked and shrugged. It could be fun. He then began to run, looking forward to the impending battle. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.